Hey, thank you all for joining. It's morning for me in Seattle, but I'm super excited to talk about GCC with some of the most important stakeholders. I wish I could be there in person, but I hope we all are continuing to staying safe with COVID-19. Jeremy, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to talk about this wonderful effort that a bunch of people have put together to empower our GCC customers. My name is Rajesh. You can call me Raj. And I went to Penn State. I actually studied in State College for almost 6 years. I did my bachelor's and my thesis in research and moved to Seattle to work for Microsoft. So please feel free to ask me any questions. I'm a product manager here. I like to keep my presentations as interactive as possible. So cut me and ask me questions. We also have Sarah and Rima on the call. They are also going to be watching the chat window for questions. So feel free to shoot questions at any point in time. With that being said, let's get started. So we have a few things to cover today on the agenda. The first thing is what exactly is the Microsoft Teams experience by default, the out-of-box experience for a GCC user today, closely followed by what are the critical controls an admin has and what is the admin experience like to deliver that experience for users in their tenant. And the first two topics are going to be theoretical, and then the demo is when reality and the practical things come into play. So I think we have some good stuff to show in the demo as well. So I'm very excited for that. And then finally, we can talk about some best practices as a summary and end the call with some questions, I guess. Does that sound good, Jeremy and others on the call?
Fantastic.
Awesome.
Awesome. First things first, throughout these slides, I have these red color pointers to just draw your attention to things. So today we've shipped a version of the client for GCC customers and particularly GCC users. And the new change that users are going to see is this ability to add tabs through a plus sign and the ability to visit the store, the app store, to go and get apps that they would like. That being said, the apps that we have enabled by default, the out-of-box experience, is not any different from the out-of-box experience that users have had until now. What that means is essentially we've enabled only Microsoft compliant apps. So you'll only see apps like Planner and SharePoint and no other apps that are not compliant. The only difference now is through these entry points, you get access to the same set of apps. But in general, these entry points are critical as these users get exposed to more apps, in the sense as admins start enabling more apps, the way a user gets those apps are through these entry points. There are a handful of Microsoft apps that are not compliant, and we can talk about them later through Q&As. That we haven't enabled for users and we haven't even exposed it to admins. So per our contract, per legal obligation, any Microsoft app that is not compliant in GCC shouldn't be enabled at all for users and for admins. So we've taken a very proactive stance at this to ensure that our customer data and customer trust is top priority, and we haven't enabled those apps at all. And like I said, we can talk about when those apps are coming, I think at some point in this presentation. Similarly, if you see the plus button, the ability to add tabs, there are a bunch of core apps like PowerPoint, Power BI, Word that come out of box because, again, these apps are Microsoft apps that are compliant and can be readily used by users in a GCC tenant. So in summary, what we've done from a client standpoint is we've enabled app entry points, which in this picture is the App Store to the left rail, the plus button, and a few other entry points. And in all these entry points, you do get access to apps, but out of box, the default experience is you'll get only Microsoft owned compliant apps. All third-party apps, the Trellos and the SurveyMonkeys of the world, are disabled by default. Any questions so far? And Rima, Sarah, any questions you guys are seeing?
No, I think nope.
I'm not seeing any questions in the Q&A currently.
Perfect. Which means I'm doing a good job so far. So yeah, let's keep going. Moving on, so like I said, as part of the agenda, so that's the user side experience. Now moving to the admin side, admins have a very, very important critical role in this, especially in GCC. And the first thing that I want to talk about is the most important controls in terms of controlling apps and deploying apps in teams. And then I want to talk about the process and the steps needed to go and enable third-party apps inside teams. So first things first, we have an admin portal called, we call it the admin portal, but then it's specific to Teams. It has all the necessary controls that are specific to Microsoft Teams. And in particular, I want to talk about Teams apps. That's the focus of this presentation. And I think I should have made this clear in the beginning itself. When I talk about GCC in this context, I'm referring to GCC moderate, GCC low. I'm not talking about GCC high. I'm not talking about DoD. I'm referring to only GCC medium, moderate, / low. So this is where an admin basically lives in order to control and deploy teams. And as part of this experience, we've provided certain controls, and what we call them here are policies. It's using policies that you control the usage of apps in your tenant, and it's through policies you determine which users in your tenant get what sorts of apps for them to use and remain productive. So with that, I want to explain two important constructs. Let me start pointing you to different areas in this portal. So when you go to permission policies, that's the starting piece to go and enable apps in your tenant. Now, when you go to permission policies, the first thing that you're going to read on top is this block of text. Third-party apps in Microsoft Teams aren't under the control, and the rest of that statement. And what that essentially means is Microsoft, when it comes to third-party applications, for obvious reasons, we don't have control over the things that a third party does. We are a platform. We have exposed our platform so that apps can be built and users can be productive by using those apps. But we don't necessarily control the architecture and the way they store things. So we put an explicit statement saying if a GCC admin enables a third-party app, it is in their hands, in their responsibility to vet that application and ensure that it's safe for their environment. That being said, I have something called as the Microsoft Certification Program. It's in its early stages. I'll introduce you to that later in this presentation, but it's a good starting point for GCC admins to see all the apps in Teams and see what kind of certification, what kind of compliance do these apps have per the disclosure of the publisher. So if Trello, if Atlassian says that they are certified, then we just show it off in that list saying, hey, Atlassian said that Trello is certified. It is a good starting point for an admin before they go ahead and do their own research. So that being said, the next critical piece as an admin tries to go and learn about enabling apps is there are two constructs. The first construct is what it is, what does it mean to control apps at the tenant level, which is what we call as org-wide app settings. Once you have certain principles assigned to your entire tenant, then you can use those principles and start doing specific things to specific users with what we call as user level permission policy. So by default, there are tenant level settings, and by default, every single user in your tenant gets a global org-wide default permission policy. But if you want, say, Sarah and Rima in your tenant to have specific controls, if you want them to have just YouTube or Trello, then you can create additional policies that will enable YouTube and Trello for Sarah and Rima only. And I'll talk more about that in the following slides. But the two constructs that I want you to gather from this slide is the fact that there are tenant-wide settings, and then there are user level permission policy settings. Both work hand in hand, but it's really, really important for an admin to understand these two constructs. So let's go into the org-wide app settings first. So in org-wide app settings, there are tenant level controls to say allow third-party apps and block a bunch of apps. Now, for the purposes of GCC, by default, we have disabled all third-party apps. The toggle is turned off, and we've added all the apps, all third-party apps. All third-party apps are added to the list of blocked apps. This way, like I showed you in the client experience, a user doesn't get to see any third-party apps at all, which is exactly what we want for compliance. So third-party apps are turned off by default, and all apps, third-party apps, are blocked in the blocked list. Now, website tab is something that was popularly asked by our customers. And website tab is essentially just a tab that can host any third-party web page. So in some form or fashion, it's considered a third-party app. We took a principled approach to saying that a website tab could be considered a third-party app. So which is why we've added it to the blocked app list as well. Let me stop here and see if there are any questions.
No, we're not taking any questions in the Q&A yet. Okay. We should probably pause at the end for some questions too. So
awesome. Yeah, thank you, Rima.
Sure.
So yeah, so in summary in this slide, so what I'm trying to say is that all GCC tenants will see third-party apps turned off and all the third-party apps added to the blocked list. Now, when you go and turn on third-party apps, it doesn't mean that all these apps are enabled by default. Even if you turn on the toggle, this list continues to be there. That is, all third-party apps are still in the blocked list, even if you have enabled this toggle right on top. So for an admin to actually go and make an app available for the tenant, they should do two things at the org-wide level. They should first enable third-party apps, and they should remove the app of interest from the blocked apps. Now, moving on from org-wide settings, there is the user level construct, which is the global permission policy. Again, by default for global permission policy, which is a policy that's applied to every single user out of box, we've taken a principled approach to saying that any Microsoft app we'll allow them by default, but any third-party app, we will block them by default. When I say allow any Microsoft app, again, it's only compliant apps. Planner, SharePoint, OneNote now, only compliant apps that we think is certified will be allowed. But all third-party apps are blocked by default. Now, like I said, this is something that is applied to every single user, and for an admin to change something in here means that they've changed it for all users in their tenant. Now, in addition to the global default policy, like the example that I picked, if you want to create a new policy just for Sarah and Rima, you can add a custom policy by hitting the add button. And it takes you to a page like this where you can name the permission policy and you can make changes the way you want it to be. As part of this experience, I'll show you in the demo as well. You can do a bunch of things. There is a reason why we have a drop down here. As part of this drop down, you can choose specific apps. You can block all apps. You have many levels of control to ensure that subset of users get specific experiences. Finally, when you create a permission policy, it doesn't mean that in the previous step, once you finish creating a permission policy, you need to go and apply it to Sarah and Rima. So the process to do that is by going to users and going and editing their policies. By default, like I said, they have the global permission policy. You can hit edit and then apply the new permission policy that you just created. Now, the popular question that I get asked here is, what about assignment to security groups? What about applying these policies at scale using Commandlets? The first point, policy assignment to groups. We've heard this feedback time and again, and we are actively working on it right now. I just don't have a timeline, but all I can say is we are getting there sooner than later. We want to ship this as soon as possible. The second question is about using Commandlets. So PowerShell Commandlets, we already have it. It's publicly documented. I can point you to some documentation to show you how Commandlets can be used to apply policies to multiple users at the same time. With that, I'll show you a quick demo of what all these things mean in reality. But again, just want to go to the Teams client to see if anyone's asking anything. Perfect. OK. So let me move on to my demo. Sarah, can you see my screen? You can, right? The dashboard.
I can see it, yeah.
Awesome. So for a Teams admin, actually, let's start in the same order, right? So for a Teams client, like I said, they're going to see the plus button. When they hit the plus button, they're going to see all the compliant apps, so they can add whatever apps they want. And these are all Microsoft apps that are compliant, including OneNote. Similarly, they can go to the App Store. They can go check out all the compliant apps in here, add them to a team, add them to a channel, doesn't matter. Users have access to these apps. Another popular question that I get asked is, hey, what's this? You know, like we didn't even enable Jira. Why is this showing up? It's a bug in the sense that we know that this shouldn't be seen the way it is, but it doesn't do anything in the sense if you click on this, it doesn't enable Confluence or anything. It's just an advertisement that is parallel and disconnected from policies. We are working on cleaning it up so that it doesn't look the way it does right now. So it's not a point of worry or anything for an admin. So that's the Teams client-side experience. Now moving on to the admin portal. Like I said, an admin starts here. It's the dashboard where they start, and then they have a bunch of controls on their left side. When they go to permission policies, the first thing that they see, like I said, is this block of text. And like I said, this is an important piece of text that an admin must read to see the steps that they need to take on their site. Going to org-wide settings, they have all sorts of controls in here. So like I said, all third-party apps are blocked by default, which includes the website tab as well. So if you go down to W, then you get, yeah, I think you guys get the point. But But yeah, so website tab is blocked as well, and we've also used the toggle which disables all third-party apps. Like I said, for you to actually enable anything, you need to first turn this on and remove the app of interest from the blocked list of apps. Similarly, under global default permission policy, we've taken a principled approach. We've allowed all apps, all Microsoft apps, but we've blocked all third-party apps. And this is a global default permission policy that gets applied to every single user in your tenant. And then finally, I spoke about adding a new custom policy. So let's say that allow Trello. That could be the name of your policy. And it's not going to let you do anything in terms of changing third-party apps. The reason being that in org-wide settings, it's all still blocked. So I can still save it and then come back to it and edit it later. So it's in here in this list for now. I can come back and edit it as well. At this point, I want to take an example and take you down that example and see if I'm able to cover all the scenarios. So in this case, let's say that I want to actually enable Trello. Let's take the same example. The way I go about it is I go to org-wide settings. I can enable third-party apps. I search for Trello. Trello is a bad example, excuse me. Maybe we can pick something like ADP, right? So let's take ADP and remove it from the remove it from the blocked list of apps and then hit save. Now remember that I've enabled third-party apps at the org-wide settings, and I've removed ADP from the blocked list of apps. Now that doesn't still enable ADP to any user in the tenant, because if you see the global policy, it still blocked all third-party apps. So users still don't get access to ADP at all in your tenant. But now you want to enable ADP for just say one user in your tenant. So now you go in and add a new custom policy saying, hey, ADP enabled, and say allow specific and block all others. So remember that I said there are a bunch of controls in here. So under each category, we have up to 4 controls. We can say allow all third-party apps. We can say allow specific, block specific, and block all. In this particular case, we want to say allow specific and block all others. And under specific app, we add ADP. Hit save. And voila, we have ADP enabled, which is a custom policy that an admin has created. Now, like I said, this means nothing. You've just created an XML saying, hey, allow ADP. You need to actually go and apply it to a user. So let's go to users. And let's say in this case, we want to apply it to Deborah. Deborah under policies has a bunch of default policies that we've assigned to her out of box. But as an admin, you can go and edit this and say for permission policies, let's enable ADP for her. And now you hit apply. The next time Deborah refreshes her Teams client, her Teams client is going to read this permission policy. So she's going to see ADP enabled for her on her Teams client. To restate what I said before, this need not be through the UX. You can apply these policies to multiple users or to even a single user using the PowerShell commandlets. And I can point you to the documentation if needed. It's publicly available. This is the main part of permission policies that I wanted to cover. So let's see if we have any questions. Got it.
I had a question actually, Raj.
Oh, please go ahead.
So when you're creating these policies, I want to make sure I'm understanding correctly. Are you still leaving a policy that blocks all other apps somehow? So typically, in my experience with administrative stuff in Microsoft, if there's a block anywhere, it's block all for everybody, even if there's another permission somewhere else. So how do those permissions stack when you're starting to do this across the board for different apps?
Absolutely. So let's take the same scenario that I took, right? So now we've enabled ADP and we've enabled it for just Deborah. Now, except Deborah, everyone else still has this global permission policy. So they still continue to block all apps. This policy continues to block all apps for all other users except Deborah. So in some form or fashion, what happens is the user level global permission policy will trump the org-wide settings. So at the org-wide level, you've allowed all apps, you've allowed third-party apps, and you've removed ADP from this list. But that doesn't apply to all users except Deborah, because this user level permission policy is going to win over the org-wide settings. Does that answer your question? But in the case of the ADP permission policy, I've said that allow ADP. So what is happening then is the user level permission policy is working in conjunction with org-wide settings. So this is where things get specific to a user.
No, that makes sense. Thank you.
Any other questions? The other thing that I wanted to show as part of the demo was, so when you think about policies, there are two aspects. One is controlling all kinds of permission and ensuring that your users are being responsible, you are being responsible, and your environment continues to stay safe. The other thing that is interesting about policies is that we think that we should give admins the ability to tailor the client experience for their end user. What does that mean? So sometimes a user will want, or an admin will want users to have certain apps that are easily accessible. So that is, they'll want an app to be pinned on the left rail, or they may even want an app to be installed inside the overflow menu. We don't know, but we want to give admins these controls so that they can leverage it and tailor experiences for users in their tenant, which brings us to a very important topic called setup policies. Setup policies, the way you should see setup policies is it's a way to tailor the end user team's client experience. It has nothing to do with policies. In fact, when I say it has nothing to do with policies, what it means is that it doesn't go and change your policies. It will only honor your permission policies. So let's say that you go into the global default, and let's say that you want to pin Adobe Creative Cloud. It'll let you add it in here, but it's not going to show up in the client. It didn't pin the app to the left rail, as you see. The reason is Adobe Creative Cloud is blocked at the org-wide level, and it's in the blocked list of apps. So setup policy will always honor your permission policies, user level and at the tenant level. But in this case, we can go and pin, we can create a new setup policy, and we can say, hey, let's go and pin ADP. And you can then go and add ADP to this list and assign the setup policy to Deborah, so that when she launches the team's client the next time, ADP is readily available on the left rail for her to easily access and start using it. So setup policy is a way to make things accessible. It's to enhance your end user experience with applications that the user needs, that the admin gets to determine on behalf of the user. A very, very powerful feature, especially on mobile devices, and to a large extent even on desktop devices for frontline workers. especially during these tough times for nurses and stuff. So it's a good addition to our policy story as well. Any questions?
Not seeing any now.
Just a minute.
The joys of working from home.
Oh, yes.
Excuse me for that. So with that, that completes the demo portion of our presentation. So let's go to the money slide. So this is the slide that I like the most, partly because I put it together. But truth be told, this is a slide, a matrix essentially that outlines how org-wide settings on the left side and how permission, that is user level permission policies, work hand in hand. Ideally, as Microsoft, as me as a product manager, I want you to be in the green state where you allow all third-party apps, and users also get to see all of them. But I get that, you know, there's compliance, there is restriction. So when you start using permission policy and org-wide settings, when you start making those changes, this is a good slide to tell you what the end user behavior is going to be like. So if you take an example of, OK, I've turned on third-party apps and no apps in the block. And let's say that you've turned on third-party apps and there are no apps in the blocked list, which means going back to the demo, let's say that you go to org-wide settings, you enable third-party apps, and somehow, you know, you manually remove every single app from the blocked list, every single one of them. So the blocked list is going to have 0 apps and you've enabled third-party apps. And let's say that you have a permission policy that continues to still block all third-party apps. The expected user behavior is third-party apps will not show up to users who have that permission policy assigned. So it's a way to summarize the things that I spoke about. It's a little confusing when both these constructs start working together, but this captures all of them, I hope. That brings me to the end of my presentation. One thing that I want to summarize is I've picked SurveyMonkey as an example, but let's say that you want to enable it for 10 users, and I've picked SurveyMonkey just for the purposes of an example, no advertisement or promo. The steps that you need to take in summary to go and enable it for 10 users in your tenant is start with org-wide settings, turn on third-party apps, find SurveyMonkey in the blocked list, remove it, create a new permission policy, and under third-party apps for the permission policy, allow specific, block all others, search for SurveyMonkey, add it to the list, and then navigate to users and find all 10 users and apply this policy to them. Or you can even use Commandlets. So this is good practice. This is best practice. And this applies to handful of apps, any one app at any given point in time. And we've documented all this publicly. So make sure you read that and understand what it means to enable these apps. Finally, I spoke about promoting apps and setup policies. So for every change you make, you can pin apps onto the left rail. So I couldn't show you a live example, but let's say that once you pin Planner, Planner is going to be made available on the left rail right here on top for this particular user. So this is what it's going to look like. That brings me to the end of my presentation. So one thing that is missing today is side loading and LOB apps. The reason why we haven't enabled it yet is, again, we have a very, very high bar for compliance, high bar for security. So for us, security is top priority. So we need to figure out a few more things before we enable side loading and LOB. But all I can commit to right now is we are very close to getting this past the finish line. Sarah and Rima know about it. So we are working very hard to ensure that we ship this missing piece sooner than later. With that, Jeremy, Sarah, Rima, back to you guys. Any questions that I can answer?
I don't have any in particular, but Rima had to drop off really quick. Jeremy, did you have any follow-ups?
No, I would like to say thank you again, Raj. This was a fantastic presentation. I've been in that admin portal. I can't even tell you how many times, and this was the best explanation of what I'm looking at, because it does get a bit confusing if you're not familiar with how the various pieces interact. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. I am so happy that people attended this presentation. I wish I could say hello to them, but add me on LinkedIn. Let's keep in touch. I would love to stay very active in the community. So ask me questions, even through LinkedIn, through the tech community, email, everything, and I'm available.
And we're looking to put up the recording of this as well as the follow-up blog post on the public sector blog.
Sure, absolutely.
Awesome.
Awesome. Thank you, Raj. Thank you, Sarah, and thank you everybody for attending.
Thank you.